let's look at other stories that have made the headlines. So the Nigeria's Minister of Finance and Coordinating Minister of the Economy, Wale Edun, has stated that the projected 2025 GDP growth rate of 4.6% falls short of the administration's ambitions. Instead, the government is aiming for a 7% annual GDP growth to significantly reduce poverty and drive economic transformation. So, he's saying that 4.6% GDP growth is not, is not high enough. So the government is projecting 7% annual GDP growth. So the minister highlighted key drivers of the growth, including stronger revenue performance, increased oil production, as reflected in budget estimates, and savings from the removal of fuel subsidy. He also emphasized the importance of creating a conducive environment for private sector investment. So he also talked about the pivotal role of the private sector in addressing Nigeria's infrastructure deficit, which requires an estimated $100 billion in annual investment. Now, first of all, let's look at the projected GDP growth of 4.6%, which the Minister of Finance and Coordinating Minister of the Economy, Wale Edun, says that it is small, using my words now. It's not ambitious enough. So the federal government is aiming at 7% annual GDP growth. Is that too ambitious? Is that realistic? Let's begin from your side, Doc.
Yeah, I think it's realistic. We've seen in the last 10 years, India had grown at 7%, and so it's not something that cannot be done. But I think the dynamics is what eventually will determine how this will happen. Don't forget yesterday, Bagudu, who I on KPMG's interview had highlighted also the fact that the federal government of Nigeria wants to resort to innovative ways of funding its own projects. And we've been hearing this around in government circles. I remember the Minister of Works also had emphasized that Nigeria has over 3,000 kilometers of road that are begging for attention. And if that has to be done, then of course, government budget can carry it. And so what they're looking at here is that all the bottlenecks that makes it difficult for the private sector to participate in the business, whether it's the downstream or the upstream or the midstream sector of the Nigerian oil and gas, or even in the construction or infrastructure building, the government is looking at removing all these bottlenecks so that people can participate. And what that means is that as long as people are bringing money to participate, that creates employment for a number of people. And as business is evolving, we can actually get to 7% of GDP. I don't think it's a rocket science. But like we have always said on this table, what government needs to do is to ensure that it works really very hard to create the right ecosystem for businesses to thrive. Because the problem actually we have is the ease of doing business. Every other fundamentals are right. But once the ease of doing business is wrong, then a lot of problems will hamper the private sector from bringing in their money into the environment. So we hope that in the days to come, we'll begin to see what government is doing in that direction to really create that environment and that ecosystem where people can do business easily, and foreigners and locals alike will bring out their resource and put into the economy, knowing that the economy is stable and yields and returns prospects are very high.
Okay, let's pick it up from where you left off, talking about private participation in bridging the gap in infrastructure deficits. So the minister actually said that it is not government that would do that. It's the private sector playing a pivotal role. But I want to ask, Ray, how do you think the private sector are going to come into this, investing to also bridge the infrastructure deficit, and then the people will get that benefit? Because if people are putting money, or private entities are putting money into infrastructure, do you think that it will reduce from how people benefit from it, maybe because of the commercial element in it?
Most of the time, when you see private sector participation in any business venture, and they are in connection, collaboration, maybe using the vehicle of the private, the PPP partnership, it's one thing they always look out for is transparency. And whilst the conversation was on, there's something specific that was mentioned, infrastructure. We're told about before we can meet the target of the current administration's 2 million barrels per day production, we need about $2 billion to make sure we revamp the infrastructure in oil and gas sector for us to attain that level. That's a lofty height, and quite is going to be a challenge for the government to get that done. Some other things that were mentioned that prevented the private participation, effective presence of the organized private sector in the oil and gas sector is corruption. So when we're talking about putting infrastructure in place, it was there itemized that, look, you do not bring politics into business. By the time you bring politics into business, you give where you make the licensing of oil blocks in the specific areas to be given to political coteries, then that's going to dampen down the participation of the private sector. And things like that to always put up the private sector where you have put on political, or you have politicized the system and you have relegated competence to the background where there are no technical know-how in the whole issue. It's going to take out the private participation completely from the system. And these are one of the issues that were mentioned about. There were also other myriads of corrupt acts that is being perpetrated in the system that were mentioned. And the thing is, will the government, using Wale Edun to tell Nigerians that we can attain 70%? No doubt we can. But do we have the political will to beat down the hydra-headed monster of corruption so that it will pave the way for us to really achieve the goal? That's the question that the government should be answering.
I think government has a strong will to do what it's doing, and that also you can see even in the local participation, especially in the upstream sector of the oil economy. We've seen the likes of Tony Elumelu getting into that sector. We've seen Aradel, we have seen a couple of local initiatives in oil exploration in Nigeria, which before now was not possible. And I know that if you see confidence of your locals in participating in that sector, so the debate is going to become more robust. And I think that's where we are at the moment. And I think that's one of the issues one of our guests was highlighting that day, that of course we're going to see more security, because if you have local participating, it becomes very easy for them to engage with stakeholders, and then we can drive that entire process. And I think that the president is determined to leave a legacy behind, and I think that can be seen in some of the decisions that he has taken so far. They may not be as pleasant as people want to see them, but we see that he has made very tough decisions that, of course, people are saying we are beginning to see some gains in the economy. Because the truth is that if he has to make any significant mark, what we have to see, first and foremost, is increase in revenue. Now, when you talk about increase in revenue and see the projections and everything that is put on the ground, you can see that somebody is working toward the direction. From a 28 trillion budget in 2023, we're doing in 2025. In 2024, we are doing in 2025 a 54 trillion budget. That's almost doubled. So it means that government is making more money, and government is investing in critical infrastructure. All we can only hope is that this trend continues. And as we are able to sustain this trend, you find that a lot of confidence is returning back to the system. People are beginning to believe in what government is doing. But I think where, for me, the core issues are not at the federal level, it's at the subnational level. That the subnationals, the state governments, should be able to complement whatever effort that the federal government is making at the center for this job creation and work creation across the length and breadth of the nation.
Okay, so still on infrastructure. Now, I like that with private participation in road construction, for instance, we can achieve 75% efficiency in terms of road networks, which will save time. Because when people have to move goods and manpower from place to place, if the time of travel is reduced, that means you get to wherever you want to in quick time. that means you're able to move goods in quick time, and then the turnover period is actually reduced so that people can get back their money fastly. Now, on the other side, still on infrastructure, if we look at the power sector, for instance, now, if private entities are to invest in that, maybe one of the conditions would be that they are able to control the pricing template so that they can get back their investment. And at the end of the day, we would then see that the tariff for electricity, for instance, will increase, which will mean people paying way more than they are actually paying now. So it's good for private participation, but I think that as much as there is encouragement for private participation, we should still have a lot of government stake in it, leading to public-private participation, so that while that sector grows, while it functions well, it doesn't become at the cost of the end user or at the cost of the masses. Because utility, for instance, when there's much private investment, it also means that the cost for it will be high at the end of the day. So while you're enjoying power, you may just be paying through your nose. That's just one point I wanted to point out.
Okay.
And then the minister talked about the restructuring of the budget funding. So it says they'll be moving from 80% domestic funding to having 40% domestic, 40% external foreign funding, so that there will be much fund available to domestic companies through the capital market, which I think is a good one. So if the government is borrowing less domestically, it gives free funds, or it makes funds more available for private businesses to access, which is a good one. That
you also note, we did the news yesterday that the federal government is also making about 3 trillion naira available to the Bank of Agric for development of the agric sector. And that also go a long way to see, because one area where we have actually not been able to take so much from is the agric sector. And of course, we're also having now a ministry that is dedicated to livestock, and see how much we can actually do with the livestock. Because there's so much money in livestock.
And we're giving that money to neighboring countries.
Oh, yes. So we need to really invest in that sector. That those who want to play in that sector, government must find a way of addressing the issues that really is affecting that sector, especially for rearing of cow and the rest of it. And I think something has urgently to be done, that this movement of cow along street can help us in that sector. Government must find a way to get some results where we can actually dedicate, maybe in cross states, to see these are places where cattle are. And then, of course, those who are investing in those places, there are enough water, there are enough grasses for the cattle to feed, that then we can actually take the advantage that that industry portends. Because we can see small country, even like Rwanda, making so much from animal husbandry. If you see the quality of cow in Rwanda, you will be shocked that is happening in Africa. So there's a whole lot that we can leverage. And if, you see, Rwanda is supplying meat to its neighbors, all the East African countries. And then, of course, they retain the hides and the skin for their shoe and leather factory.
Not for consumption as
Oh my God, you can't take it out of Rwanda. It's not possible. I can't even eat it as pomo as you are doing here. It is highly protected because it's dedicated to that industry. And I think that some of these things we need to actually put in place to see how we can make real fortune from this area. There's so much money.
Okay, so when he was talking about this issue of taking Nigeria to the 7% threshold of the GDP, he was talking straightly that that is the level where you will require to take Nigerians out of poverty, which is a laudable step. However, one thing we must see that it has become a norm, and I'm going to go back to the oil and gas sector briefly because I needed to point out something that is pertaining to infrastructure. And I can say before the current administration, it has become a norm where the refineries were moribund during those period of time. And yearly, we used to churn out $1.5 billion, $2 billion to these refineries for turnaround maintenance and all of that. So, though I would say we are living, or maybe we are left that dispensation for now. However, we will require that the current administration audit how those monies were spent, because we are talking about infrastructural development and how these will require about $2 billion or more to make sure that our refineries are in the right frame. Now, some of these state assets and some which are privately owned, so that will require the intense presence and attention of the government to revive, are even named here. The big ticket projects include the Zabazaba 150,000 barrels per day, Shell Bonga Southwest 225,000 barrels per day, Bonga North project 100,000 barrels per day, Chevron and Seco projects 100,000, ExxonMobil's 140,000, satellite field development phase of 80,000 barrel. Now we have not even started talking about the Warri refinery and the Rivers refinery that is about more than 200.
So no issues. Don't mix them up. What you are talking about is oil drilling, the crude. But that has nothing to do with refinery. So what government is targeting is the fact that, yes, our projection for this year was 1.5 million barrels of crude extraction from the ground this year. But now we're already exceeding by 700 barrels. So which means government has actually ramped up
our projection with regards to the budget for the MTF.
Yeah. No, that is the crude production, which of course is the OPEC quota. The OPEC quota for Nigeria was 1.5. Now we have exceeded the OPEC quota at the moment, and government is aiming at...
I was referring to the forecast by the current administration.
Yeah, that is what
not
I'm saying.
for
That's what
not
I'm saying
the
to you.
OPEC.
We're not even talking about crude processing, which has to do with the refineries. Now, what they're talking about is the oil wells. The oil wells that we have and the capacity for us to actually drill 2.1 barrel, which is what OPEC used to give to us. And that government is hoping that we can even go up far more than 2 million barrels daily. And what that means is that if we are doing more than 200 million daily, then of course, we will have enough resource to invest in other critical infrastructure. But the beauty here is the fact that government is not driving this process. Government is also enabling private sector to participate in these ventures. So that's what I'm saying to you. People like Tolim, we're already drilling. They're already having wells that they are pulling out things from even of the deep waters. So this is good for us, that government is not relying on itself alone now, but also is allowing the private to have a participation. And then, of course, my own is once you can create that enabling environment for this private sector participation, we will get the value we want. Refinery working or not working, that's NNPC's issue. Remember, when Obasanjo regime...
Are there issues that we can...
No.
We cannot completely
we
separate
let's
these
not
issues.
Let's not get into the oil sector deeply.
When we had telephone issues, NITEL was moribund and wasn't doing anything. And then GSM technology came and a lot of private people entered into GSM. We had MTN, we had what they used to call it, those time, Vodacom, all manners of people came into the operation. Now, Econet then was there, now has transmuted severally to become Airtel now. Now we had MTEL, which was a NITEL owned subsidiary in that sector. It was run aground, but telephony has continued because MTN will not be run aground. That is the beauty of private participation. So you are not leaving it in the hands of government where it's going to be corruptly used, but you are leaving it in the hands of private businessmen who want their profit and ensure that they get results from every single dime of investment that they are putting in.
All right, let's not get deeply into the oil sector because we will do that during policy discourse. But the bottom line here is that for anything to work, for any sector to work, government must play its part. If you're bringing in private participation, yes, it's business, but it cannot be left totally to private businesses to run, else it will just be a capitalist system, and it will reduce from the benefit that the people will get. Now, for government not being able to do business or to run its enterprise, I think that's a narrative that government should be working at correcting. and that's where Priya was talking about the willpower to actually tackle corruption. So if there's a willpower to tackle that, government can begin to change the narrative that it cannot run its enterprise profitably. Yes, there's a difference when you have private investors because the volume of money that they put, and because this is private money, nobody wants to see that whoever is supposed to do their job is not doing their job. Nobody wants to see that things are going wrong and they turn a blind eye on it because people feel it is government's business, and so it's everybody's business, so nobody's taking the bull by the horn. But when it's government business, you tend to have negligence. You tend to have people piffering public funds and just feeling it's a national cake.
It's beyond piffering. Government is a social service provider. And by the conception of the state itself, the state is not designed to run business. The state is designed to regulate individuals who are going about their private enterprises. So what state does is regulation. Regulate those who are playing so that the weak are not wiped out by the strong. So that mediation role is what state naturally should play. Because what state provides social service? Now, by the time you now put money to run a social service, you know that money is not going to come back to you. But what government needs to do is to sustain the private doing well so that they can continue to get money to provide their social services.
Okay.
And I think that is the way
but there's something we also consider in this concept of government role in providing just social services. I think that specific concept, we were taught about that specific concept a long time ago in school, and I don't think governments of the nation now are working with that curriculum anymore. Because if you completely shut government out of business, or that the government alone, the terms of reference of the government is just to provide the ecosystem for private businessmen to come and take over the system, a time will come that even the regulatory power of the government will be dictated by these private endeavors. So currently now, as the way the Nigerian system runs, the Nigerian Customs Service brings in money for the government. Even the JAM, the Joint Admission and Matriculation Board, which terms of reference in the first place was not to provide, was not to make profit, is making profit currently.
Those are not businesses per se.
They are not businesses per se. But what we are getting, what the government is getting for that, it is additional revenue to the government, and it is going a long way in attending to public issues and to providing public facilities. So we cannot completely remove government from the business. I think you cannot say, oh, even the way the NNPCL operates now, we are being told it's just on paper, or just to say the government is not interfering in the way the NNPCL is run, that is as it is now, it's a private enterprise. No, it is running with government mandate, and the mandate that the government has given it is to make profit. So it is a government business.
Yeah, but
let's move on. Let's move on to
is really, see, government has equity in some stake in businesses. We talk about LIG, government has a stake in it, but it's a joint venture between government and private. There are businesses like that where government has to invest and stake some money. Recently, we even had Nigerian government going to invest in European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. And that's government stake in it. You put money there so that it can earn some revenue. But it does not mean government is managing those businesses.
Government is not involved in the operations of it, but they may have a stake. Maybe 30%. They have, even in the power sector, governments still have stake.
Depending on what it is. It's just a business, and then, of course, they get dividend if these businesses are properly run. And I think this is the way it's structured.
Okay.
All global.
Okay. But what we're saying is that for enterprises that government run fully, government can do this. There are states where we have state transport system. Lagos State is showing that it's working.
It's not working.
It's working. Okay, it's working.
It's not working.
It's working. We may talk about efficiency, but that is not to say it is not working.
Even the buses does not belong to Lagos State. They are privately managed.
A few of them belongs to the Lagos State government.